Hello, everybody. Welcome to our session here today on science fiction, tech, and games. My name is Dean Takahashi. I'm the lead writer for GamesBeat at VentureBeat. And our session today is being broadcast both in Zoom and in virtual reality on Oculus Venues. So welcome, everybody. And this session was inspired by this quote from Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, who has said that we are living in science fiction now. And, science fiction, tech, and games, they all inspire each other. And the creators in each one of these fields is pushing society forward and accelerating ideas and turning fantasy into reality. And so in this session, we're going to talk about all of this sort of inspiration cycle. And I'm joined here by Tim Chang, who is a partner at Mayfield Fund, a two-time Midas List investor who has invested in companies like Drop, Engimoco, and Playdom. Welcome, Tim. And
hi, Dean.
We also have Ramez Nam. He's a science fiction author. His books include More Than Human, The Infinite Resource, and the Nexus trilogy. And Apex, the final book in that series, won a Dick Award in 2015. He's also chair for energy and the environment at Singularity University. And I think unlike many science fiction writers, he spent 13 years working at Microsoft on technologies such as machine learning. So welcome. And
hey Tim, good to be here.
Yeah. So my first question is, how did you two meet?
Tim reached out to me on Facebook one day and said, "I like your books. Do you want to have dinner sometime near the Bay Area?" And I said yes, and he set up an awesome dinner with a number of very cool people. And I brought a couple other friends as guests, including another great sci-fi author, Hugh Howey. And we've just hit it off immediately and have stayed in touch ever since.
Yeah, I had a hidden agenda. I was testing out this idea. I wanted to bring scientists and founders and some of my favorite sci-fi authors together and see what kind of brainstorming and magic would ensue. And it was fantastic. Ended up being like 3 or 4 different sci-fi authors, some pretty interesting folks in the science community. And yeah, it was pretty inspiring to me.
Some people, one prominent person in games, some people in neuroscience and meditation. So, pretty good.
Yeah, you guys shared a lot of things in common. Like, I guess you both like Burning Man profile, right?
Yeah, there's that also.
There's that.
So, where did that instinct come from, Tim? I know, Ramez's works are near fiction, or near future science fiction, I guess. So, in that sense, it seems like it makes a lot of sense that you tap somebody like that for ideas about what to fund. But what else drove that instinct?
I grew up influenced by sci-fi. It's what got me into engineering, programming, and even venture capital. But there is a really tight link between inspiration we get from sci-fi. I mean, there's classic tales of many entrepreneurs who'd walk into VC offices back in the day with Neil Stephenson's Cryptonomicon and basically slapping the book down and saying, "I want to build this, fund me," right? And so there's many of those inspirations. A lot of my investment thesis ideas are fueled by, near-term speculative fiction, whether it's Black Mirrors or, my favorite, the movie Her. I've been looking for somebody to build adaptive, personalized, in-ear hearable OS for years, right? And so there's a tight, virtuous circle between science fiction, how it influences founders, scientists, the kind of research they do, and how, technology innovations in research influence authors and what they write. And when I read Nexus, I was like, I have a suspicion this guy knows business, he knows Burning Man, he knows spirituality, he knows technology, he knows social sciences, and I was spot on. And we've been great friends ever since.
Yeah.
And it was clear he knew programming as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Ramez, do you want to talk more about your background too? And just like,
I'm
this
kid.
Slide comes.
Yeah, kid in 63, and my first love was philosophy, but I realized there was no career really to be had there. And then I liked physics, but didn't want to be a white lab coat my entire life. but somebody had given the school I was at, my elementary school, a Commodore VIC-20. And so I fell in love with programming, and I thought, okay, and this is something that's like an infinite canvas, you can do whatever the heck you want. So I went to school, got a CS degree. Out of school, I was lucky to get hired by Microsoft. Spent 13 seminal years there, got to see and do some amazing stuff. But I also, I became a burner early on, and I was fascinated by what happens inside my mind. And so I started just reading up on neuroscience, and I had some friends that were neuroscientists who, when I would ask them a question of like, why does this happen? They would just, first they'd answer questions. And after a while, they'd get tired of it. They'd be like, read this paper, read this textbook. And so to me, the whole universe, right? So there's a book called The 3-Pound Universe, that everything we experience, everything we desire, all of human ingenuity is in this little mass here. And so my first book, More Than Human Nonfiction, on human augmentation, was just because I was fascinated. I would get Science and Nature, the two top generalist journals, were like my bathroom reading, if you will. And I was fascinated by the things that I saw going on, like rats that had electrodes that could use those in their motor cortex to control a robot arm and feed themselves. So I wrote about that. But honestly, nobody bought that book, really. I think it got like well reviewed. It was like a nonfiction pop science book. And so for quite a while, I thought about writing fiction. And when I finally did it, it's just a whole different way to reach people. And it's, when you reach them on an emotional level, you get so much more permission to get stuff across into their minds. And that's what got me there.
Tim, this whole thing that he mentioned turned into this whole nootropic sort of brain enhancement, body enhancement movement. Right? I think you've seen that in venture capital work. Right?
Oh, yeah. Interweaves quite a bit with wearable technologies, because first we had things just tracking basic heart rate signals, then it advanced to reading EEG. And, the first generation was reading things. We're now definitely well into the writing aspect. So you've got neurostim, you've got other things that not just read signals, but then boost them, augment them, put signals back into the body with biofeedback.
And let's talk a little bit more about the Nexus trilogy. Ramez, I know it might be hard for you to do this, but can you summarize it very quickly for us? some of the issues that come up.
It's a near future, set in 2040. The technology that people are most fixated on in the book, there's a lot of like biotech and AI and so on, but it's this thing called Nexus, which is basically sold and marketed as a party drug, and people, burners and ravers and whatever, do it. But really, it's nanobots that get in your brain and attach to your neurons and broadcast and receive what they're doing. And so if two of us take it and we were in close proximity, our brains would start to sync up. We'd become sort of weakly telepathic. And the protagonists are San Francisco Bay Area grad students that are working on making it permanent, building an app layer and APIs on top of it, proxying it across cell phones and the internet, so you could telepathically communicate or share memories with people anywhere. And the real, sort of moral issue in the book is who gets control of this technology. And it's all in the form of a thriller. It's a thriller where there's a Cold War between the US and China, and various entities want control. So a friend of mine called it Tom Clancy meets Burning Man. I think that there's a little bit more to it than that, but if you want some shorthand, that's not a bad place to go.
Yeah. And Tim, do you have some comments about what occurred to you when you read this?
Oh, to me, it struck me as a spiritual successor to the Matrix trilogy. And my first thought is, somebody needs to pick this up and make a long-form TV series about this. And I remember I've been bugging Mez about this for years, and he's explained to me the red tape and the bureaucracy of what it's like getting fiction optioned for TV series.
I've explained to Tim in venture terms, it's like your option is your seed round, and the
Yeah.
series or the film is the IPO, or at least a large exit. You're SPAC now. And actually, there's an analogy there, just to be totally random. Netflix and Amazon and Apple TV are now adding the SPAC layer.
Yes.
Easier ways to get out there. But maybe it'll happen someday. There's people working on it again right now, shopping it around in Hollywood. So someday, perhaps.
Mhm. I liked how the book sort of spelled out the consequences of this sort of magical invention of the the brain enhancing drug, I guess, and also the relationship to artificial intelligence, right? The politics of how different people or different countries react to creation of this. The U.S. Sort of has this faction that views it as an illegal drug, and the creators of it are terrorists, and they have to be stamped out. And the Chinese think, oh, this is a great way to extend a single point of view or single consciousness across all of the country, and we can control everybody better. And yet they also fear the post-human AI as well. So they have their own factions, and then in the middle of all this are these hacktivists, right? Who are sort of being hunted down and have to move underground. So the politics, are sort of a very interesting or sort of more realistic part of this science fiction, I think.
Thanks. I tried. I just threw in the kitchen sink of what I knew, but on the politics, when I started writing it, I was actually quite irritated about the war on drugs and the war on terror. And so I was writing about a technology that I liked. I was writing about some spiritual aspects, things like Buddhism and meditation, and how a brain technology could actually help amplify or help people access some things in those spheres. But that political viewpoint of sort of the question of does government get to control or not was in my mind. And then I just did the exercise of, what will be the big geopolitical conflicts in 2040, or when I was studying my books, and a Cold War between the US and China seemed not out of the question. So that became a natural tension to set up. Hopefully things go way better in the world than the politics I wrote in the novels. Though I'd say the period from over the last 4 years, the Trump presidency, was stranger and more extreme than most things in my books. So truth is often stranger than fiction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing that happened that nobody really expected was, about 8 years ago, artificial intelligence really started working, right, with deep learning neural networks, and the sort of acceleration of the AI tech that for so long everybody had criticized as just total fantasy, right? And so that's accelerated the pace of technological change, and now it makes some of these books seem not so silly anymore. Some of the science fiction, right? And Tim, I wonder, what you think.
My favorite phrase these days: you can't make this stuff up. It's truly challenging because fiction is feeling, almost like it can't keep up with reality and some of the edge case scenarios we're running into now. And I'll give you an example. Black Mirror's, I think it was season 3, episode 1, Downward Spiral, where one social reputation score affects access to rights or ability to buy tickets. Like 2 months after that episode, I think China declares its citizen score, black box algorithm based on loyalty to the Communist Party, determining access to, I don't know, probably getting like loans or buying train tickets or something like that. And so you're seeing truth, or reality mirror fiction in ways that are really creepy, and reality outpacing what we'd even thought about in these ways. The point I wanted to make is that Mez does a masterful job weaving in things like spiritual, political, cultural considerations into sci-fi, which often has been a genre that didn't often do that. But I would argue that it's these aspects as well as the financial and business model aspects that are even more pertinent and important to especially near-term speculative fiction, science fiction.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim. And important to the actual tech we develop and fund, right?
Hermes, did you, you worked in machine learning for so long. Were you also surprised to see this acceleration of AI?
I would not say that I'm surprised to see this acceleration of the effectiveness of deep learning. You just look at a variety of tests, and the precision and recall on a variety of things was getting better and better and better over time. I didn't predict that deep learning in particular would take off. Like if you had asked me at the time that I left Microsoft, we were using 2-layer, 3-layer neural nets at the time, but boosted decision trees were still in the running. SVMs were still in the running, and now like deep neural nets have like really blown up in terms of their effectiveness, in part because of the incredible computational power we have, and elastic clouds, where you have the luxury of being able to throw 1,000 servers at something if you want to for a short period of time, and the explosion of data. And it's definitely becoming a world where there's been a lot of sci-fi written about inequality. But one of the big inequalities between businesses, at least now, is inequality of data, right? Whoever has the most and best data can train the best AI. And so we see this data advantage, these data virtuous cycles, these flywheels, as Amazon would put them. And nobody's really written about that. But I think that's actually, there might be a good sci-fi concept in that.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to
jump in there and sorry, I was just saying, I think when we were brainstorming before, we were even joking that imagine the next Star Wars trilogy is more like Data. What would a Data Death Star look like? What would Data poor rebels look like versus a Data rich empire? So it's almost like you could take well-known tropes and memes from before, but apply them with sort of the new context where data, algorithms, AI, the people who understand these things, are the new players in those wars.
Ramez, how did you feel about the fact that science fiction always depicts AI as something that can replicate humanity and is evil as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I honestly, in my day-to-day life, I don't worry about sentient AI. It's just, I think that it's a category error. Like the stuff that we're talking about is AI, machine learning. It's really good pattern recognizers, and I just don't know that we're really any closer at all to her in a real sense, or Hal from 2001 or the Terminator. That said, and we can get into why I think that if you want, but that said, I do get annoyed that the depictions of AI in media, not always, but usually are negative. Her is actually a great example of a counter story to that. It's also very rare for a sci-fi story to be a romance instead of an action thriller. But most of the time, most depictions of AI in sci-fi books and even in sci-fi movies are, it's going to get you. Here's a thing that's super powerful and smarter than humans, and it's going to eradicate us. Well, A, like, why would it care about eradicating us? And B, maybe there's a different story, which is humans being abusive to their creations that they distrust. And so you saw me pivot a bit in that direction in the third book, Apex, where I definitely posited AI, the AI that had been created, as a very dangerous entity, but also showed its more human side, if you will, intentionally, because.
Yeah. I think about some of the predictions that were in the books, and in a lot of ways, it predicted a lot of difficult political discourse that we saw over the last 4 years. there was white supremacy and the white supremacists creating a virus that they hoped would wipe out all the other people of the world except them. Right? And the crackdown or reaction to that from governments against that kind of activity, and then the sort of more natural reaction then to the Nexus drug technology that followed, I guess. And so I'm curious, what you think sort of got right, and some things that also surprised you then.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think reality is going to go the way of the Nexus novels necessarily. I think a lot of new technology that augments people, that makes us smarter, longer lived, healthier in our old age, smarter, will get accepted bit by bit. But the plot structure I used to motivate the world I wanted, where there was heavy conflict, was one of this technology being heavily misused and that causing fear. And while I think that we don't have this tech, so it's not really an issue there, I do see the huge role of fear in politics today, right? And like the election of Donald Trump, what's happened politically since he's been in office, the filter bubbles people are self-sorting into, fear of the other, I think is a massively negative force in American society and globally. And so I think I'm curious, Tim, if you have thoughts. I know you're a spiritual guy. I know you care about this stuff. I know let's see a better world. Like, what can we do to build different business models, different technologies that reduce fear of the other and actually get people to empathize or come together in some way?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something I'd like to see sci-fi explore more, which is unintended consequences of business models meet powerful technologies. Like, I'd argue we've built the real life matrix now with our social media platforms, not from some evil AI overlord that wanted to enslave us, but because we happen to pick a business model of free ad-based revenues. And often in those cases, when it's algorithmically driven and feed based, the only conclusion is you have to engineer for products that addict users. There's no way around it. And so even for me as a venture capitalist, when I realized that, I told my partners, guys, I'm just not going to look at business plans for social digital media products that have free advertising-based revenue models. I just don't think it's an ethical model, not with the way that we have to scale and grow these things, right? And so, I'd love to see more sci-fi that explores unintended consequences of these kinds of business models mixed with exponential technologies, right? It's a great way to map out what can go wrong with these things.
Yeah.
Sadly, it seems like you're going against the grain there in terms of what is popular to fund, I guess, or also very, very successful.
Capital seeks superior returns. That's not always what's best aligned for the planet or for people, right? News, as a matter of fact, if it leads, it bleeds. What does that push us to publish, right? So I think that we have to explore business models and how it forms the way we wield technologies. And I've always said, tech ain't good or bad. It's just a tool. What is your intention? What is the model? What is the business that you wield it with?
Ramez, in your role at Singularity University, you're focusing more on climate change, right? Issues related to that. Is this a kind of pivot for you as far as like what your interests are, or somehow did this come out of that interest in science fiction?
Well, it's been the last 10 years. So actually, the second time I quit Microsoft, my goal was to go write a book about saving the world, about innovating in climate, energy, and so on. And my agent, it would have been my second book, and my agent just didn't love the book. So I got stalled, didn't know what to do. So I said, okay, I'll write the science fiction novel. But yeah, for the last decade, in parallel to writing the Nexus books, I've been a forecaster, public speaker, and sometime investor in clean tech, in companies trying to address climate change and other global challenges, but mostly climate and energy. And there's some similarities. There's a sci-fi aspect of looking into the future and understanding what technology is coming down the pipe. But mostly it's just that I see it as an enormously important problem. And for me, I'm not a proper VC as Tim is, but I get people pitching me on deals all the time where I think, oh, this could make a lot of money, but I don't see how the world would be any better with it in existence. So for me, it has something that's addressing a real pressing problem for humanity, and has the potential to be a good investment on that side. But climate's a hard thing. It's a very, very big challenge. It's a challenge that is here. It's a present danger, and it's one that gets worse over generations. And it's one where it's hard to frame it even in sci-fi. I know there is a lot of sci-fi talking about climate change, but you just don't have a silver bullet. You can't, end the story with the good guy beating the bad guy or the eureka discovery, because whatever it is we do, it's actually going to be a wide panoply, a portfolio of different approaches we take to decarbonize, cars, buildings, ships, planes, steel making, whatever. And then it'll take decades to deploy all of it. So when I think about climate change, I think about it as a personal, thing that I work on to try to educate people, motivate business people about where to put their money and why. But from a fiction perspective, I see it more as a backdrop to science fiction stories rather than the core conflict or MacGuffin, if you will, in the story.
When I think of what from science fiction has become really popular in tech circles, it's almost unavoidable to not think about the metaverse, right? And Neil Stephenson coined that term way back in 1992 or so with Snow Crash, and Nexus has a lot of roots, I think, in that. I do wonder what both of you think about whether we'll very soon create something like a metaverse.
Tim?
Already happening, seeing dozens and dozens pitches. We've got successors to Second Life, which itself was a successor to The Well. We've had virtual worlds for decades now, but now the headsets, the browsers, the devices are catching up to it such that we can have some pretty compelling experiences. So these are going to continue to take off. Again, starts to beg the question, what's your business model? Let's say you have a business model that maximizes or incentivizes for maximum session lengths. It's going to be in your interest to build a more appealing world in VR or metaverse than the real world. And next thing you know, we'll have VR addiction clinics, right? So that's something we'll see here. A lot of people recently got turned on to this by Ready Player One, but I was talking to the Mez about it. That wasn't actually, to me, very future looking. That was a love song ode to retro 80s geeks like us who grew up with those things. It was like a mixtape of past looking greatest hits as opposed to something truly future looking, right?
Guys, your own thoughts on metaverse?
Yeah, I think there's super interesting stuff in both VR and AR. And as the hardware gets, smaller, lighter, longer battery life, cheaper, I think we're going to be able to do all kinds of incredible stuff. I do wonder. I mean, today it's really VR that has taken off more than AR, I would say. But I do wonder if, as these worlds get more robust, are they going to face the same challenges of social media? When I pull out my Oculus and I put it on, a whole lot of what's being, pitched at me are social experiences. They're not the ones I tend to gravitate to. But online, you can find a group where they're just going to amplify your opinions, whatever they are. And people we've seen self-select for that. They enter their filter bubbles, they self-select for things that amplify their existing political beliefs, especially. And VR has the power to be a much more, or AR, to be a much more emotionally impactful medium than the ones that we access today. And so, am I going to have like the Benghazi experience and the, being on the inside of the Capitol when it's stormed experience that are pushed at two different audiences? And is that going to tear us apart more? Or how do we avoid that problem? Maybe I'm overthinking it. Maybe it's all going to be like exploring the under the sea or going to Mars for fun or whatnot. But I do just have to wonder, just given the experience of the last few years, how VR will get used and whether it'll bring us together or pull us apart.
Yeah, it's a great point because often with... Oh, go ahead, Dean.
Oh, I just watched that film that debuted at Sundance, A Glitch in the Matrix, and it's a quote from the Matrix movies about that's the only way you can tell when you see a glitch. That's the only way you can tell that we're living inside a computer simulation, and it goes back to I guess a 1977 speech by Philip K. Dick, a science fiction writer, about how you would be able to tell whether or not we're in a simulation. And the film is also interesting because they found people who believe this, right? And that they're living their lives as if, when they walk out of a room, the simulation goes off in order to save energy, right? And that all the people who were in the room talking to them, they just sort of disappear. And it feels like the logical extension of the technologies everybody's trying to create to make a believable universe. I didn't think we'd see those consequences of people really believing that that's true.
Yeah, I think that'd be a major consequence. People really believe that was true. I'm even thinking about more prosaic things. So one of the first VR experiences I had was at something called the Nantucket Project 5 years ago, let's say something like that, where they had VR headsets for everything. They had basically a whole stack of iPhones and a cheap, not Google Cardboard or something like you put on. So it wasn't like the highest end system at all, but it was an experience of being in a Syrian refugee camp. And you had, all you could do was turn, you could rotate, you were on a guided tour, you couldn't like walk around on your own. But you had a kid, basically as your guide, walking you through and explaining how things were and real footage taken in the camp. And it was hugely emotionally impactful. It probably is still the most emotionally impactful thing I've done inside of VR. And so maybe there is room for empathy. I think that has the chance to, help people see other people as real human beings. But will it get used in other ways? Will it get used to create hatred or sow dissent? Hopefully, empathy and love. I do believe, despite the difficulties of the last 4 years, that overall more communication and higher bandwidth communication does create more connection and understanding. But that's on net. There are subsets of that communication that go the other way. And so I think we're still trying to figure out how to maximize the good there.
Yeah, that film, A Glitch in the Matrix, sort of talks about that sort of self-reinforcing notion that everything else out there is like fake news, right? Brings up some of those concerns about politics that we brought up before. Tim, do you want to weigh in on computer simulations?
Yeah. Well, my personal belief is the Planck constant is an interesting one to noodle on, is that our processing power of the simulation computer behind us. But a kind of framework I wanted to share is that we tend to, whenever there's a new platform, we port things. That is, we adopt things that we knew from before onto the newer platforms. And what typically is a hit are things that are native to that new platform. Example, when iPhone came out, we just ported platform games and shooters, but it was really Angry Birds. That was the first bona fide hit because it used the unique aspects of the touch interface. In VR, the first collection of content is first-person shooters and things you've seen before. And there's a couple funny little phrases that I've heard before, that often in tech, which is new forms of content always on new platforms are the 3 Gs. It appeals to the most based instincts of gambling, girls, and guns, right? So there's usually violence there. So that's sort of the 3 Gs. And then business models are similar. They appeal to base instincts. There's that saying that it gets widely spread and viral if it helps users get paid, made, or laid. Right. And so to Ramez's point, could you have other models? That's why I led an investment in a company called Trip with 2 Ps I had written a few years ago, the most obvious thing is to go launch first-person shooter games and Netflix 360 VR. But I wanted to see not Netflix VR, but net trips. Could you induce more self-discovery? Could you induce more connection and empathy with others, with self, with nature? And so arguably, Trip is building one of the first digital psychedelics, or a technodelic, if you will, designed to shift and expand consciousness, right? So that's a totally different use case than what a typical sort of game that you would port over for VR would be. These are new categories. They're still in the works, but at least it was, for me, a way of like, let's make ourselves better through these things.
Yeah. It's
I hope
an
we
amazing.
can give some shares to Remez for that. Yeah. Sounds like Nexus, right?
I think that's Tim's own vision. Well, and the founder's vision.
Influenced a bit by you, Mez. I'm gonna give you credit where credit's due. A lot of these precepts really do come from things like your stories.
Yeah, well, thank you, and I think it's a great effort. It's a great thing to fund and try to use this technology to actually help people, modulate their emotional state, find more peace, find more tranquility, access their spirituality. What better use for technology is there, really?
Yeah. Now, we have some audience questions, and the audience can ask questions by typing to the chat in Zoom. But we've got some interesting ones coming back that are reacting to some things we're saying here. And one of them is like, how do you pop these bubbles? People are, I guess, deluding themselves, I guess, but also how do you pop those business models that are dangerous?
Yeah. I think the question how you pop the bubbles is easier than how you pop the business models. So, I mean, if you look at Facebook, the feed optimizes for engagements. It optimizes for like how many likes and responses do posts get, and it brings you back to people who you've engaged with in the past. And so that ends up reinforcing either positive engagements, people that you closely agree with, or sometimes it reinforces like sort of vicious negative engagements. But if I wanted to pop the filter bubbles in Facebook, I would start finding a way in the feed to surface some of the content that is not quite on your side, maybe it's not all the way on the other side, that is best written, most reasonable, most accessible, most from people that you trust, to try to spread some of that, sharing of ideas. There's good data that in social networks, whether it's our personal friendships or others, the weak connections are actually some of the most important ones. They're the ones that, take one clustered network and another clustered network and bridge them together. And I worry that people are more just entrenching inside their own networks. Now, would that make Facebook more money? Maybe not on, the first quarter that it's out there. But I think if I were Facebook and I were Twitter, I'd be worried. So instead, obviously they're doing well, but the platforms have both become toxic enough that people are fleeing from them. And I think doing something to create more constructive and positive engagement and promote and surface the most productive and constructive and positive engagements across divides might be something that turns that around.
I totally agree with Mez on that. And a couple of vectors I've been considering. One, back to business model. What if it's not just purely free and ad-based? What if it was tiered subscriptions? What if it wasn't free to make a comment? What if it cost you a penny, right? Would you get rid of trolls immediately? This begs the question of, do we need to redefine what free speech is in this digital era? My conclusion is that there's freedom of speech in what you say, but we're in an era where there's no cost or accountability to speech, right? Especially when you can have pseudonyms, especially when you can create fake accounts. That's when you can hijack platforms, and that's where things get dangerous. Maybe we can alleviate those with design of algorithms, feeds, feedback mechanisms, getting rid of vanity metrics like likes and retweets, but also business model choices. The other way we could pop these bubbles is, I do think that the ultimate thing people want to pay for is meaning, purpose and self-expression. And so if you are helping people bet on themselves, helping them be their aspirational selves, that's more like a self-improvement world. And I do think that that is of value. This is a silly example, but back in the day, MP3s were worth zero, ringtones were worth a lot, because ringtones were a self-expression branding moment. And that was the difference between content versus having self-expression, right? And so self-help has always proven that people want to bet on themselves, making themselves the better upgraded versions of themselves versus the downgraded, addicted versions of themselves, which our current feeds and business models designed for.
We promised a little bit of talk about games, and I guess maybe I'm supposed to be bringing that in more than anybody here. It's interesting to see games drive toward this increasingly realistic fictions of humans. And if you think about the progress we've made with AI as well, there seem to be a lot of similar moral implications for the designers of these. We've talked a lot about how social networks require some more responsible guidance or leadership here. I think on the game side as well, we're eventually going to have these questions arise about whether these artificial beings we're creating inside these worlds are ours as property. Are they our slaves? If they're so real that they have their own consciousness, then how wrong is that? I wonder, what your own guidance might be in this, what the designers should think about this consequences.
I mean, I'm not actually all that worried about that. I think it's orders of magnitude easier to create something that has a great facade of intelligence than something that is actually sentient, aware, and volitional. I think, going all the way back to Eliza. Eliza was the text-based psychotherapist made in the 1970s. And all Eliza was like a Perl script. And you would say, I'm worried about my mother. And it would find some keywords and say, tell me more about your mother. Well, my mother is, sick with diabetes. And it would say, how do you feel about your mother's diabetes? And that's all it took for people to anthropomorphize it over a keyboard. So I think you can make incredible simulacra, and there's really a demand for that in games. Obviously, we want really good NPCs we can interact with and strong storylines. We'd all love to have a digital personal assistant that's an amazing organizer of our lives. And doing that does not require you to solve the problem of actually creating consciousness. It's way easier, and it doesn't run into the ethical issues. That's what I would guess the future holds.
I get excited a lot about this topic. I wish I could do a poll of how many in the audience ever develop genuine emotions or feelings for an NPC character. And I say this because I just finished about 100 hours in Cyberpunk 2077 and actually noticed genuine, affection for some of the love interest characters. And this got me thinking about, could games be a vehicle for developing communications, relationship skills with others? Imagine dialogue trees mixed with actual, relationship coaching skills and responsive dialogue. We're going to have semantic processing that can do that. You can actually improve your relationship with your family and your wife someday, potentially, through these sorts of things. That's back to the Her analogy from the movie, where you then full on fall in love with your operating system because it knows you better than anybody else. But that it could be a possibility. My other challenge for game designers, the ultimate opportunity is, what if you replace all the end bosses in video games with actually deeply spiritual kind of reflections? The game learns you, and it turns out the big boss at the end is your own shadow side, your core wounds, your unresolved traumas. Kind of, if you saw the movie Soul from Pixar, those lost souls were just you wrapped in the own shadows of all your projections and traumas and self-limiting limitations. Imagine then game as spiritual experience or self-transformation vehicle. That's what I'd love to see.
I think those are awesome ideas, Tim.
It's fun stuff.
I have to pause every now and then and just sort of marvel at what you guys say. So, if you just want to keep on talking, so it's very interesting conversation. Fascinating.
As you were saying that, Tim, the first part of that, a friend of mine's at a startup that what they do is they make software for kids with autism, and they do have gamified experiences that helps them understand, how do you read an emotion? What is this person doing? What's the right response to them, and so on. And it seems quite effective. But the idea of just using it for sort of ordinary adults or teens or whoever that needs to learn new socialization skills and whatnot is a really good one, I think.
And independent gamers in the art world have been doing this for a while. There are games like Papers, Please that would even teach you empathy for, Borders customs agents and stuff like that. They were more fringe, but you could imagine these learnings, these mechanics making their way into tier 1 AAA games.
Yeah, I read the Ready Player 2 now, and one of the more interesting things I thought he got right in there was that streamers will be the ones that will post their experiences, what it's like to do something in virtual reality that is hyper realistic, so realistic that you feel everything, and that they will post these things like on the equivalent of a YouTube, and you would just step into these .ai files and go and live somebody else's experience. You could go and completely understand what it's like to be them, whether it's a transgender person or somebody in a country far, far away, and that was a bit of a hopeful sort of message. That these technologies can be so immersive that it can really communicate to you what it's like to be somebody else, and that could increase empathy because it's so immersive.
Yeah,
something to hope for, maybe.
I think there is
1995 film. Oh yeah. Did you guys remember a 1995 film called Strange Days? Ralph Fiennes. Had this squid recorded emotional experiences, and it was the ultimate spectate mode because you could feel the emotions, the sensations, right? And then even Cyberpunk 2077 had the notion of brain dances, which built upon that as well, which is quite cool. But yeah, that's back to that notion of VR as empathy engine. And they'll be good, they'll be bad. You can imagine snuff videos and horrifying things, but there could be beautiful things like witnessing the birth of your baby or falling in love, right? The whole range could be possible.
And maybe some of that has to do with education as well. Like I saw a question go by on the list here about what's the role of VR and AR in education. But people, when they are selecting what they're going to go watch, of course, there's a lot of people that watch amazing documentaries and try to educate themselves and so on. But there's a lot more that goes to like action, adventure, comedy, romance, simple escapes. But in schooling, maybe one of the things we have to be schooling is live a day in somebody else's shoes. And I think that's an amazing tool for VR or AR to help people learn, like, what's it like to be different race, different gender, to be transgender, or to be living in Sri Lanka or in, Myanmar, and to build that degree of empathy. And when you combine that with things like real-time speech translation and other things like that, I can imagine situations where you actually really do increase global empathy. But I'm no longer quite as sure that it will all happen by itself. And maybe we have to make the intentional choice to use this technology in these ways to help drive that.
And Mez, you know what? Somebody told me TikTok is kind of doing that. I've got a lot of problems with TikTok and its algorithmic content. But what a lot of people say is you get authentic slices of life 5 to 30 seconds at a time from all over the world, like, a kid in the streets of Myanmar or something. And so that possibility is happening in these lower res formats, something I had not expected.
That's really cool.
Yeah. I'm browsing through some of these questions as well, and there's one for Ramez that I guess what's the distinction between psychedelics or drugs and technologies like virtual reality. And in Nexus, it really is a drug, but it has the effect of sort of like taking augmented reality glasses and putting them inside your head, right? So
I think Tim should answer this one too. But they are complementary technologies, and B, something can give you a psychedelic experience without putting anything in your brain whatsoever. Whether it's the right media that you're consuming, whether it's a book. When I read Samuel Delaney's book Dahlgren, he's a master of sci-fi, that was like a 1,200-page psychedelic trip. It really was. Or it's the right experience in nature or whatnot. Now, when you talk about AR and VR can do some amazing things, including psychedelic experiences, but they can probably be amplified or further amplify things that can be done with substances or meditation or other practices as well. So there's no bright line, but there are, some things that are easier to do in different ways. It's easier to give someone a very specific visual experience with screens than it is with anything that any drug you're gonna put in their brain. But it's probably easier to induce some other things with something, whether it's brain stimulus or molecules that go into the brain as well. And the two together might be, 1 + 1 = 3 or 1 + 1 = 5. Who knows?
Tim?
You could, like what Ramesh says, is you could start to play with people's perception and feedback of different senses. You could start to mix them together, like synesthesia. You can kind of simulate, in these virtual domains. A thing I've been thinking about too is, could you start to simulate what death is like as you start to lose your senses? I saw one art project where VR was used to give people a sense of what it's like to be paranoid schizophrenic by playing with senses, overlays of things, phantom voices. You could imagine the empathy that could create for different neural states.
Tim, I noticed you're on the board of a nonprofit called Reimagine Death, and that topic comes up frequently in books like Ready Player Two about digital immortality. I mean, you think a lot about that and the opportunities there, I guess.
Wired magazine had an article about somebody who created a MeBot for his dying father, and it was like an evolutionary ELISA experiment. But you can imagine how, if semantic and natural language processing gets better and better, the corpus of data you produce in all your emails, all your text messages is probably enough training data to create a simulacrum of somebody that actually sounds like you, right? Knows your favorite phrases, words, sentences to use, response patterns. So you can imagine your digital tombstone someday is a MeBot of you, which could increasingly answer with better fidelity, interactions and questions from your great-great-grandkids. That's actually really quite interesting.
You just described what the founder of Replica did with text messages. She had a friend who was a best friend but died in a car accident, and she gathered every text message that he had ever written to friends and family and all that, and tried to basically reproduce a digital companion that now is friend of millions and millions of Replica users. So
it's even a field now called death tech, and there's going to be subscription business models based on, I will preserve your legacy vault. As programming and machine learning gets better, I will recreate you with greater fidelity as time goes on based on everything in your legacy vault. So we're going to see some cool things. And back to sci-fi, I think it was the Man of Steel remake of Superman that had Superman's father as this kind of MeBot that was actually coaching him when he went back to the crypt, the spaceship. So good examples in sci-fi of this.
That's true.
There was a wonderful Black Mirror episode called San Junipero as well that talked about this. Right? Sorry, Ramez, you're saying something.
No, I was just agreeing with you guys.
And we're nearing our end here. I wondered if there was anything you'd like to sort of leave with our listeners here about what you think is going to happen in the future. Anybody?
I'll just say I'm super excited. Like I've sounded some notes of caution here, but I do think, like, over the big picture, over the long arc of human history, anytime we've invented new information technologies, there's been some bad stuff, but overall it's empowered people. And so I think we're struggling with catching up with the consequences of filter bubbles and social media, and how does society deal with them. But I do think this ability to connect is still a power for good. And I think that AR and VR are in their total infancy. They're really just baby technologies right now, certainly in terms of adoption and wearability and all this stuff and fidelity. And as we get there, I think, like every technology, there'll be some misuses, but there's massive opportunities for good. And I think there's a lot of people here. Obviously, we're at GamesBeat, so I think game developers have the potential to use these technologies to not only entertain, but entertain and enlighten, entertain and empathize, and help make people who play your games more fulfilled and better people as well.
Oh, big yes to that. I'm in such agreement with Nez. A great example, Genova Chan, founder of that game company. Remember Journey? His new game Sky has a lot of this enlightenment type of theme. And I guess what I'd leave with the audience is, just like sci-fi authors have a responsibility to create not just black mirrors, but white mirrors. Same with you guys, of creating experiences that help people become, better versions of themselves, not just at, killing things, but maybe leveling up and self-transformation. That would be really exciting. Really good sci-fi to turn to, I think, for these. We're going to see a whole lot of like cli-fi, climate fiction, right? Kim Stanley Robbins's Ministry for the Future has been recommended to me many times. A great one. And then I actually think back to the notion of exploring business and politics. There'll be new categories like DeFi, decentralized fiction, or, financial fiction, which explores worlds of like, cryptocurrency and the craziness that happens there as business models get turned upside down. And so there'll be a lot of aspects there that can make their way into game themes as well.
Yeah, I've had interesting experiences thinking about things from way back, like the whole quantified self movement that inspired a lot of these, devices for measuring things like your heart rate and all that. And I had a chance last year to wear one of those Dexcom glucose monitors, and to sort of learn and feel what it's like to be like a person with diabetes that always had to pay attention to how much sugar was in their blood. And it was very eye-opening just from eating a meal of pasta, how much my sugar level would spike, and while I was jogging, like how much the sugar level would dip. And it was very interesting to see how not only this technology now has moved into the stage where it can automate an insulin pump for you, right? And so really help people have the disease, but also helping people themselves realize, like, okay, what kind of mood am I in when I've got all this sugar in my blood versus, towards a point, and how does this affect my brain and my actions? And so technology to me is really delivering. It's on the cusp of delivering some really interesting capabilities for all this obsession with measuring everything. The quantified itself is sort of at our fingertips, and I think it's going to be very interesting next few years with those kinds of technologies. But thank you very much for this fascinating conversation. I hope we get to do it again. And I don't know where it might be, like maybe Clubhouse or something like that. But
VR.
Fascinating.
Well, thank
VR
you,
version of
Dean,
it.
and thank you. This was super fun.
Thank you, guys. Yeah.
All right. And thank you for listening, everybody.